Good evening, Husky fans. Thank you for tuning in to the 28th episode of Husky Dash. I'm your host, Nathan Mathisen, and today I'm going to be starting off the show talking about the Husky basketball game that just took place against Utah in round one of the Pac-12 tournament. After that, I'll look at the Huskies in the NBA and name a couple that I think are having quite a nice season so far this year. To end the show, I'll then get into my continuous segment talking about the position breakdown on the upcoming year for the football team. Today, I'll be talking about the offensive line and discussing how I think they're looking heading into the season. Now, feel free to leave any comments or any questions you have in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to them. Before getting too in-depth into this and starting off the show, just some big news that came out this past week is wide receiver Puka Nacua announced that he would be transferring from UW. That same day, then he announced shortly after that he'd be transferring with his brother Samson, who's already in the transfer portal, and they'll both be headed to Provo for BYU. In an interview Nacua did that day, he stated that the real main reason that he was transferring from UW was for family reasons and wanting to be able to help out his mother and grandmother. Last year, in 3 games that he played, Nacua had 9 catches for 151 yards and 1 touchdown. He, of course, missed the last game due to having COVID. In the year prior, with very little playing time his freshman year, Nacua had 7 catches, 168 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Well, the loss of Nacua is a big loss. It's not necessarily catastrophic, as the Huskies' receiving core group is very deep. And as I'll talk about more on next week's show, they have some very talented players. But getting back into the Huskies basketball team. So it's really just been an end of a nightmare for the Huskies in the season, going 1-11 in their fall games. They then finished the regular season with a record of 5-20, and in their first game in the Pac-12 tournament at the 10 seed, going up against the 7 seed Utah, they lost. Now heading into the tournament, going up against Utah, comparing them, UW was 1-1 against Utah. They lost the first game they played against Utah all the way back in December by 14 points. They then won the most recent game against Utah, which took place in January. UW won that game 83-79. So really going into this game, it could have gone either way, in my opinion. Now in the tournament against Utah, they lost 95-98. The score really doesn't tell the whole story, though, as UW at times was down by nearly 20 points. And really what killed the Huskies this game was their inability to get anything going on their offensive end or defensive end. For the Huskies, whenever they would make a shot and kind of chip away at that lead, Utah would always be able to respond with a big bucket. Utah was especially hot from deep, making a whole bunch of threes. Now, I don't quite have the statistics. Oh, here they are. So Utah shot 14 of 26 from deep, shooting over 50%. It's really hard to beat a team when they're making 14 threes and shooting over 50%. And as you saw, UW didn't beat that team. Now, UW did really fight the whole game, especially towards the end. Washington was down by 19 with just under 6 minutes to go in the game. They're down 66-85. The Huskies then really turned it up a notch, started to make some three-pointers themselves, but it was simply too little too late to really make a difference. Utah was led by Timmy Allen, who put up 24 points, shooting 8 of 13 with 11 rebounds and 4 assists. Behind Allen for Utah was Alfonso Plummer, who was really a heartbreaker for Washington, as each time the Huskies would make a three-pointer, chipping away at that lead, getting it down to single digits, Plummer would answer with a 3 of his own. as Plummer put up 21 points and shot 6 of 11. All 11 of his shots were three-pointers. Overall, the Utah's offense was just too much for the Huskies to handle and for the Huskies to overcome. For UW fans, the score in the end might look like the game was a lot closer than it actually was, as UW really was actually going to need a miracle to pull off the game in the end, as they dug themselves in such a deep hole. At points, with just a minute to go in the game, the Huskies were actually down 9 points. Now, Utah kind of struggled from the free throw line, just giving the Huskies a glimpse, but that glimpse was really never going to actually be enough. The Huskies were really just prolonging the game, which in a Pac-12 tournament game, that's what you'd like to see, and that's what you'd expect from a team. The Huskies showed heart by doing this, and that's one thing that the Huskies have really showed all year long. Even in games where they lose by 20 plus points, the Huskies often will have their starters playing the majority of the end of the game, if not all the way to the buzzer. If you've got a bad team with no heart, then you've got a complete culture change needed before your team's even going to be nearly competitive enough to win a lot of games and make some noise. Now, that's not these Huskies. They have heart. They have that fight. So as long as they have that, I feel that they'll be able to compete and just win some games, make some noise. But overall, this team isn't good enough to really win enough games to make it to the NCAA tournament or make a bunch of noise. What I'm saying is, with the heart, they'll be able to get those upset wins, and they'll lose a lot of close games. Now, they'll still get blown out quite often, but with heart, a team can do a lot. I mean, in March Madness, when there's a Cinderella team, do you really think that's the better team? No, they simply had more heart in most cases and maybe got a lucky bounce here and there to keep them winning. Now, this Husky team is going to need some serious help if they want to compete next year, as they don't have a very strong recruiting class, and they're losing both Amir Wright and Quade Green, two key contributors. Green definitely is heading out on a high note after having, in my opinion, his best game in the Husky uniform. Green shot 10 of 18 against Utah, putting up a career high of 31 points. To add to his point total, Green also dished out 7 dimes. He had 2 steals and 3 rebounds and shot a perfect 9 for 9 from the free throw line. Then, right in his final game in the Husky uniform, it was not the way he wanted to go out. He got into some early foul trouble, picking up 4 fouls quickly and just not being able to play as many minutes as he'd like. In his limited minutes, though, he still made an impact, shooting 3 of 6 from deep and hauling in 6 rebounds. Now, was the team perfect this year? No. But losing 2 of your top contributors and not adding anyone who appears to be capable of making an instant impact is really a recipe for disaster that the UW fans really should know all too well about. As well, quite frankly, that's what happened this year. Last year, the Huskies lost their 3 top contributors. They replaced those guys with a couple of transfers who really were not capable of filling those shoes they were left behind with: Isaiah Stewart, Jaden McDaniels, and Nas Carter. As much as I want to say this Husky basketball team's future is bright, I can't. But speaking of bright futures now, transitioning into the next segment, let's look at a couple of Huskies who really are standing out this season in the NBA. Now, so the NBA is currently at the halfway point on the year, and I'm going to be looking at the 9 former Huskies who are currently in the NBA and see who's really having a good year or a great year. Starting off the segment, I'd have to say that DeJounte Murray has been playing some really nice basketball for the San Antonio Spurs. Now, DeJounte was on the Huskies for one season, from 2015 to 2016. He was a one-and-done guy. And in that year, he ended up averaging 16 points per game, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals per game. He was named to the All-Pac-12 team, and he was named second team All-Conference in the Pac-12. So he was the All-Pac-12 freshman team. DeJounte, following that year, was then selected by the San Antonio Spurs with the 29th overall pick in the 2016 NBA draft. And each year now, DeJounte's really just improved. He's improved in all 3 of the major statistical categories: points, rebounds, and assists each year. Last year, Murray averaged 10.9 points per game, 5.8 rebounds per game, and 4.1 assists per game, playing in 66 games, starting 58 of those. Now, so far on this year, in a little over 30 games, Murray is averaging 15.8 points per game, so 5 more points per game, 7 rebounds per game, so about a little over 1 rebound more, and 5.4 assists per game, so a little over 1 assist. He's also shooting 45% from the field and 32% from deep. Not the best shooting numbers, but really Murray is just an all-around guard who can do it all for the Spurs. At 6'4" with a 6'10" wingspan, Murray is a guard who's capable of getting rebounds, he's capable of getting steals, getting his hand in the passing lanes like he did so many times for the Huskies. Currently on the year, Murray is averaging 1.6 steals per game, and earlier on in the season, a game against the Warriors, Murray even had a game with 8 steals. So Murray definitely knows how to get his hands in the passing lanes and steal a possession for the Spurs. Murray's really just having a strong breakout performance so far on the season. Now, another Husky who's been playing some good basketball this season is a guy who's been doing it for much longer than DeJounte Murray, and that's Terrence Ross. Ross played 2 seasons for the Huskies back in 2010 and 2011. In Ross's freshman year, he was an honorable Pac-10 All-Freshman team player. That freshman year, he averaged 8 points per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, and 1 assist per game for the Huskies. In the Pac-10 tournament that year, Ross really shined and really took a big step forward. He averaged 15.3 points per game in the tournament and 2.7 rebounds per game, and was even named to the Pac-10 All-Tournament team. Ross, heading into his sophomore season, then took what he learned and what he really showed in the Pac-10 tournament the past year and did it for a whole season. In his sophomore year, Ross averaged 16.4 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game, and 1.4 assists per game, along with 1.3 steals per game. Ross that sophomore year also helped the Huskies really make a splash in the NIT tournament, averaging 25 points per game and 5.5 rebounds per game, helping them lead them to the semifinals. Following his successful sophomore year for UW, Ross declared for the NBA draft after only 2 seasons at UW. Ross ended up being picked by the Toronto Raptors in the 2012 NBA draft with the 8th pick. Now, Ross's first rookie season, Ross played 17 minutes per game, averaging 6 points per game, shooting 41% from the field. Ross's freshman year really highlight, I guess you could say, was winning the dunk contest. Ross's best performance in the regular season and on the court for the Raptors was the game against the Trailblazers, where he dropped 26 points, making 6 3-pointers. By Ross's second season on the Raptors, he was a consistent role player for them, averaging around 24 minutes per game for the next 4 seasons for the Raptors. Ross's best career year was actually his second season, were his best career year for the Raptors. He averaged 11 points per game that year, shooting 42% from the field and 39.5% from three. Now Ross's best overall career year was in 2018 with the Orlando Magic. That year he averaged 15.1 points per game and shot 43% and 38% from deep. Now, so far on this year, through 35 games, Ross is on pace to have a very similar season to that 2018 year with Orlando. So far for Orlando this year, he is averaging 15.5 points per game, shooting 41% and 34%. So his shooting numbers are down, but his rebounds are the same at 3.5 boards per game, and assists are up from 1.7 to 2.2 assists per game, which is a career high for him. Ross is a guy who knows his role in the NBA, and that's to provide some scoring off the bench. He's not a guy who's going to be a playmaker for others. He's a guy who's going to spot up, hit the three, maybe make a driving dunk. So really that's what he's been doing, and he's been doing that a good amount this year and doing a good job at it, averaging 15.5 points per game. Overall, there really aren't that many Huskies in the NBA at the moment doing spectacular things. Like I said earlier, there's only 9 Huskies in the NBA. And a lot of those guys are young players who are really fighting for minutes and trying to really chip out a role for themselves. So perhaps in a little bit, there'll be a few more Huskies putting up 15 points per game. Now, guys, I think that have some talent and for you to keep an eye on in the NBA is one of these guys is Isaiah Stewart, who is a rookie this year on the Detroit Pistons. Now he's averaging 18 minutes per game, putting up 5 points per game and 6 rebounds per game, and has really looked good in short bursts that he's gotten for the Pistons his rookie year. And really, Stewart's just been improving each time he's gotten out on the court. Another couple of young players for the former Huskies in the NBA are Jaylen Noel. He's averaging 9 points per game, playing only 16 minutes for the Timberwolves. Jaylen Noel spent a lot of his early years in the NBA in the G League, really kind of trying to find a role for himself. Now, the final Husky that I'm going to mention talking about the NBA is Markelle Fultz. He's a guy who struggled immensely his first couple years in the NBA. He really didn't have a reliable or even a good jump shot. And I'll give him credit, he's really worked on that and really improved on that. Not to where I'll say he's a good shooter, but he's an okay shooter. He's a guy that you don't have to look at as a liability out there, and a guy that defenses can't just guard while standing in the paint. So he's definitely improved since he first came into the league. Unfortunately for Fultz, however, he tore his left ACL after playing only 8 games this year. So he's going to miss the rest of the season with that ACL injury. Now, up until tearing his ACL, he was averaging 13 points per game, 5.4 assists per game, 3 rebounds per game, and 1 steal per game. So overall, the Huskies in the NBA aren't making huge splashes, but there's a couple guys doing their role very nicely and just playing some good basketball. So moving on from the Husky basketball team and getting into my segment where I do the position breakdown or position preview for the Husky football team's upcoming 2021 season. This week, like I said last week, I'll be talking about the offensive line. Now, in my opinion, the offensive line for the Huskies, they're in a pretty good spot. They have Luke Wattenberg coming back for a 6th season, and Jackson Kirkland deciding to stay for his senior year. So overall, this offensive line is really just full of veterans. This will be now the 2nd year of them playing together, as nobody is leaving from the starting 5. They're only actually losing 1 offensive lineman in total. Rounding out the last 3 spots for the offensive line, they've got senior Henry Banavalu at right guard. And at the other guard spot, they've got junior Ulamu Ale. And at the right tackle position, they've got Victor Kern. So overall, they've got all upperclassmen on their offensive line, including 3 seniors. Now, 2 of those seniors have started for 3 straight years now for the Husky football team, so they're very experienced with on-field playing experience and actually getting those snaps. And overall, even with those other guys being 2 juniors and 1 senior, who this will now be his 2nd year starting, they're just all veterans and all guys who have been on the field, taking snaps, getting on-field reps that are really all you can do to improve. Highlighting Jackson Kirkland, as last year, it was his first year playing the left tackle position after moving out there. He was named first team All Pac-12 last year for his performance. He was a guy that some people, including myself, thought that he might put his name in the NFL draft. Now, luckily for the Huskies, he decided to stay for another year. Last season as a whole, this offensive line was very good in their pass blocking. They allowed only 1 sack all year long. Now, albeit it was only 4 games, and the Huskies overall didn't throw that many times. They were really a team that loved to run the ball. But still, allowing only 1 sack in 4 games is an accomplishment that they should be proud of. So right off the bat, looking at that number, this offensive line is looking like a very good offensive line. But there's more to an offensive line than pass blocking. They might have only allowed 1 sack per game, but where the Huskies' offensive line really needs to improve is in their run blocking. Last season, the Huskies averaged only 176.25 yards per game on the ground. Now, at first glance, that number might look pretty good. But taking a step back and comparing it to the rest of the Pac-12, that ranks 6th at the Pac-12, so middle of the road. Looking at yards per carry for the Huskies, it was even worse, as they ranked 8th in the Pac-12 with 4.52 yards per carry. And really, last season was just a weird season for everybody in the Pac-12, so you can't take those numbers completely in whole, but still, it's still something to be worried about and something to keep an eye on for this upcoming season. As really Jimmy Lake and the Huskies' offensive strategy to me and to really everybody seems to be run the ball, and just run the ball some more. So maybe that will change with Dylan Morris likely being under center for his 2nd season now, as he was a true freshman last year and he was a redshirt freshman last year, but his first year starting was last year. And now with him being a sophomore, more experience under center, Jimmy Lake and the Huskies might take the leash off him a bit and let him sling the ball around. But really, we'll just have to wait and find that out. And in my gut, I feel like it's just going to be more of the same, running the ball. And even if they decide to throw some more, the Huskies will still need that reliable run game. And a reliable run game relies heavily on a reliable offensive line. So looking at maybe seeing a possible shakeup in the starting 5 for the offensive line, I think it's possible. I mean, these guys' jobs are clearly not locked in. Nobody has 100% job security in college football. But overall, I don't think it's that likely that anyone comes in and is a starter day one for the Huskies offensive line. But they are an extremely deep offensive line group. So perhaps someone could work their way into the starting lineup as the season progresses. Guys to keep your eye on would definitely be a guy like left tackle Troy Fatanu and right tackle Corey Luciano. Both of those guys got some very good reps this past season at offensive line. But really, I see them as doing more of the same this upcoming year, kind of a situational play when they want to go 6 offensive linemen, or as a guy who can come in and give Kirkland or Kern a rest for a couple of snaps. The guy that I actually see as most plausible to steal a starting spot as the season progresses is Miles Murrow. Last year, he redshirted as a freshman. He came into UW as a very highly touted and highly ranked 4-star prospect. I believe the Huskies have him listed as a center, but I could see him taking one of the guard spots as the season progresses, just because of his talent he comes in with and his physical traits. If he is given this opportunity to show what he has, and if he's able to translate his high school skill that he learned, and he's able to learn from the Huskies offensive line coach, Scott Huff, then Moreau could definitely possibly take Victor Kern's spot. Now, Kern was an honorable Pac-12 mention this past year, but that was his first year starting. So really, I can look at that two different ways. One way I could look at that is, okay, he's going to improve this upcoming season as he's got a year under his belt and he's more experienced overall. He's got the on-field practice, which you can't replicate. The other way that I can look at that is he was their most experienced guy at that position after having a shift in players due to guys like Trey Adams, Nick Harris, and Jared Hilbers leaving the year before. After those guys left, Kern was really the clear choice at offensive guard with Ale. So perhaps if Murrow is able to live up to the hype and really show something early on for the coaches, then the coaches can look at him in situational spots, put him in where he can get game reps and just continue to improve. And by the end of the season, maybe he'll have passed Victor Kern in the starting lineup. All I'm trying to say here is that I think a change for this offensive line could be a good thing, as clearly something wasn't working completely this last season, as they struggled in the run game immensely. Now, they especially struggled towards the end of the year in their last two games, where they averaged only 102.5 rushing yards and only 3.42 rushing yards per game, or rushing yards per carry. The first two games against Oregon State and University of Arizona really pulled that overall average up. And you look at University of Arizona and Oregon State's defenses last year, they're very porous and two of the worst defenses against the run game in the Pac-12 last year. I look at it for this upcoming year. If the Huskies struggle in any way week one against Montana on the ground, then I think there would be a need for change at the offensive line position, as a team like the Huskies shouldn't be struggling against Montana. Now, perhaps they do great against Montana, so then they probably won't make changes. And then maybe they'll struggle against Michigan. Then maybe changes are needed. I look at it as before you get into conference play, so those first 4 weeks, if the Huskies' offensive line is struggling in one of these games, then the coaches need to try to fix it before the important games in conference begin, when you really need to cherish those wins. Now, that just about finishes up all I have for you today. Once again, I'm Nathan Mathisen. You can follow me on Twitter with the @ that you see on the screen below me right now. Now, I'm just a small part of the Dash Sports family, so if you'd like to meet the rest of the crew, check out our website, dashsports.tv. That's where you can find as many clips, quips, tips, rips, and as terrible jokes as you can handle, all in one place, all for free at dashsports.tv. I'll see you next week with maybe more Husky basketball, but definitely more Husky football, including another position group breakdown, where I'll be breaking down the wide receiver position group and what they're looking like with the loss of Puka Nacua. But for now, this is Husky Dash signing off. Thank you very much. Have a good night.